An agreement on strengthening partnership had been signed, in addition to a series of industry documents, as well as a declaration on a multipolar world is expected to be signed. What do you think this document means geopolitically for the world today?
Thank you very much. Nothing can be more important than China-Russian friendship and cooperation in the world of today. And the two countries are very much committed to further deepening such cooperation and friendship. And I will not be surprised if the agreement signed today will push the bilateral cooperation to a higher level. I'm very much encouraged to see that not only President Putin has come himself, 5 deputy prime ministers also came, and many cabinet ministers. And I also noticed that the head of the oil company, the gas company, the satellite company, the fertilizer company, and major investment companies are all following the leadership of President Putin to come to China and to talk with the Chinese counterparts. So I would not be surprised if, in addition to this declaration of further cooperation, many deals will be signed in the areas I just now mentioned, making sure that China-Russian solidarity and cooperation will have no limits. Really, especially in the world of today. And further, allow me to emphasize that President Putin is a household name in China. All of us know about the great president, and we are very happy he is coming here again. And President have exchanged more visits with each other than probably any pair of leaders in the world of today. We want to see more such visits, better understanding, better promotion of China-Russian friendship and solidarity.
Victor, the Chinese president said unilateralism and hegemony had caused great damage to the world. It's a thought that was echoed by Vladimir Putin. Who or what do you think was referring to exactly with these remarks?
Well, first of all, allow me to emphasize the world order established back in 1945 was not meant to be unipolar. It was meant to be multipolar to start with. Look at the composition of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations, 5 permanent members, each with a veto power. Both China and Russia are permanent member states. Therefore, if anyone in the world of today, including, for example, the United States, wants to hold itself out as the unipolar in the world, it's wrong. It's against the original intent of the founding fathers of the existing international order. And I don't think China and Russia, in our respective capacity or collectively together, should ever allow any one country to dominate above the world or to rule as a hegemon against all the other countries. Multipolarity in the world is the mega trend. All the countries should recognize that, and China and Russia will never allow any country, without naming the name, and you should know what I mean, to dominate against all the other countries and achieve what they want to achieve, unipolarity in the world.
Yeah, I think we can all figure out which country you're referring to. Victor, the Russian president said, quote, cooperation between Russia and China is the most important factor in stabilizing international relations today, stressing that the relationship between the states contributes to deterrence and stability. Can you elaborate on what he meant by that?
Absolutely. I think China economy and Russian economy are highly complementary to each other. And I think cooperation is without limit between us. The two countries, the two economies can really support each other in very imaginative ways. For example, our bilateral trade is about $300 billion US. I hope it will reach $1 trillion US in the coming years. And there will be many more joint production, technology sharing, etc. China and Russia are working together to land astronauts or cosmonauts, as the Russians call it, on the moon before the end of 2030. There are many things we can work together. China can learn a lot from the expertise and the know-how on the Russian side. Russia can leverage off on the advantages accumulated by China over the years, especially in the world of today, China's leading position in the artificial intelligence revolution. So these two countries, highly complementary to each other, supporting each other, fully respecting each other as brothers and sisters, can strive forward for mutual benefit. And also, China-Russian cooperation will be a pillar supporting stability and peace throughout the Eurasian continent and in the world as a whole.
The Chinese president said Moscow and Beijing will defend the authority of the United Nations by opposing the hegemony of fascism and militarism. What will these efforts likely lead to?
Well, of course, both China and Russia are founding members of the United Nations. We are the founding permanent member states of the Security Council of the United Nations, and we have a mission to do. We have a job to do to make sure that neo-fascism or neo-Japanese fascism or Nazism will never raise their heads. Allow me to mention one thing. If you look very scrupulously in the United Nations Charter, the clause called the enemy state clause still remains on the book. It's still binding on all the countries involved. Therefore, I think China and Russia should really coordinate their efforts to make sure that in Japan, the new Japanese fascism will never raise its head. And in Germany or throughout Europe, new fascism should never raise its dangerous head. Only by completely pushing down any stirring up of neo-Nazism or neo-Japanese fascism can mankind really expect that peace will prevail. And this is not only just for China and Russia, this is for all the 200 countries in the world, the 8 billion people in the world. We should never allow new fascism or new Japanese fascism or new Nazism to raise its dangerous head to threaten peace and stability and security of countries like China and Russia, but also more generally, all the peace-loving countries in the world.
Victor, Vladimir Putin stressed that there are, quote, no treaties left that regulate the field of security, disarmament, and nuclear weapons control. What are the reasons that got us into this situation, and how can this issue be addressed by Moscow and Beijing?
Well, first of all, what President Putin described is a very dangerous phenomenon. I think Russia and the United States, which have the largest amount of nuclear warheads, should work to talk about the limitations or the restrictions on the number of nuclear warheads to start with. This will be very important for Russia and the United States and for all the other countries in the world. Now, between China and Russia, we respect each other. We do not second guess each other. And our long border, 4,300 kilometers long, remains an unarmed border, enabling people on both sides of the border to exchange visits to each other's side without any restrictions. Now, between China and the United States, both recognize the importance of the other side, and we do not want to engage between China and the United States in any war effort, for example. I've been calling for the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. So how to make sure that between Russia and the United States and between China and the United States, we will always talk about peace and stability, and no one should really agitate for war. And the limitation and the restrictions on the nuclear warheads between Russia and the United States is important. And between China and the United States, I hope we can also come up with trust-building measures to make sure that the inevitability of peace will prevail. And the so-called Thucydides trap, implying destined for war scenario between China and the United States, will be generally and universally considered as a fallacy if it is applied to China and the United States. Between and among China, Russia, and the United States, we should all talk about peace rather than fantasizing about war.
Yeah, peace certainly sounds like a better direction, doesn't it? Victor, trade volume between the two countries has grown tremendously to over $200 billion. But in the first half of 2025, there was a negative dynamic of the main trade indicators between Russia and China. In January to July 2025, the volume of mutual trade decreased by 8.1% compared to the same period in 2024. What could be the reason for that?
Well, I think first reason is the volatility of the oil price, and the oil price is not stable. It goes up and down, etc. And now it's way up against the same period oil prices in 2025. So I think whenever we look at the trading numbers between China and Russia, we should always follow the volatile movements of the oil price, and also to a lesser extent the gas price, etc. However, that in itself is not sufficient to explain China-Russian trade. As I mentioned, we should really aim to increase the volume of China-Russian trade up to about 1 trillion US dollars. That's about 4 times increase, about 400% increase of the current China-Russian trade. And we should also talk about much more about joint production of things, meaning Russia should enable more Chinese companies to set up factories inside Russia to produce locally, to create more jobs in Russia. And then China-Russian cross-border trade should really be much more facilitated and accelerated, removing all the restrictions that we can come up with and make sure that there will be seamless transition of goods, services, and people between China and Russia along our long border. And both countries should really come up with very creative ways to make sure that both China and Russia will benefit with a much more increased bilateral trade between us.
How does the situation in the Hormuz Strait influence China's broader Middle Eastern strategy? We saw Donald Trump visiting China last week, where reopening the strait was discussed between Trump and Xi Jinping. Is this something that Putin and Xi are likely to talk about as well?
Well, first of all, allow me to emphasize that before the United States and Israel launched this war of aggression against Iran on February the 28th, the Strait of Hormuz was open for free navigation. So if the United States really want to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the answer is very simple. Stop the war against Iran right away, rather than agitating for more military assaults. And on the other hand, I do hope President Trump will know himself and know the other side, which is a very important teaching in the art of war by Sun Tzu more than 2,000 years ago. Meaning, I will be surprised if Russia will just sit helpless to see the United States turn the table completely on Iran, because if the United States defeat Iran or force a color revolution or force a change of government in the like of the United States will move up to the Caucasus right away. And if the United States establish its military presence in the Caucasus, in Georgia, Armenia, or Azerbaijan, then going further up north, the United States military will really move down from the Caucasus and move directly onto the vast Russian plain and march all the way to the gate of Moscow. That probably will be a nightmare for Russia. So I do believe Russia will not tolerate if the United States really wants to conquer Iran, and Russia may do whatever they can to make sure that the United States does not defeat Iran or move up to the Caucasus to establish a U.S. military presence. Likewise, on the Chinese side, we do not want to see Iran defeated. I think Iran, with its very old, ancient, 6,000-year civilization, very splendid culture, and the people very hardworking, for example, deserve to live and continue to live as an independent and sovereign country with their full rights enshrined in the United Nations Charter. That means I think the United States not only should think about Iran in its own capacity, but also very importantly about China and Russia, because we do not want to see Iran defeated.
Victor, the U.S. dollar still sits as the dominant global currency, with the U.S. determined to keep that status quo. How important is it to change that layout?
Well, first of all, the dominance of the U.S. dollar does not exist in a vacuum. It is dependent on many things. Therefore, if the United States government wants to destroy all the other preconditions for the dominance of the U.S. dollar, it's the US dollar dominance will not continue for too long because all the other preconditions are destroyed or undermined by the US government itself. Therefore, for example, when the Trump administration talks about the weaponization of tariff, try to make sure that the manufacturing jobs are moving back to the United States, they disregard one fundamental principle. That is, if you want to have dominance of the US dollar, you need to run a trade deficit. You can't have both. You should have either or, one of the two rather than both of the two. That means the United States government should really be more scientific and more professional in dealing with the dollar dominance on the one hand and also the trade deficit on the other hand. You need to pick and choose. If the United States wants to enjoy a trade surplus, then by logic, the US dominance of the dollar should diminish. And that doesn't talk about all the other things that other countries can do together. I would say with the decline in the US economy, the US dollar dominance should be expected to come down, and sometimes very rapidly. And mankind as a whole should be fully prepared to see that tomorrow of the world will be very significantly different from the world of today.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. Victor, thank you.